Think Siberia is just snow, vodka jokes, and trans-Siberian railway photographs? Then how about a crater that locals have called the nest of the fiery eagle for over 3 centuries, where every Soviet expedition that descended into it either fell ill, died within a year, or refused to ever return? Or a cave in the Altai Mountains, where geneticists in 2010 identified a finger bone belonging to a human species that was not Neanderthal, not Homo sapiens, and that we still cannot fully name. Or 9 experienced mountaineers found dead at the foot of a pass, half naked at -30, with injuries that have no consistent explanation 70 years after the fact. And in the finale, the ground itself is exploding, right now, in holes wide enough to swallow apartment buildings that have appeared across the Yamal Peninsula in the last decade, and that nobody, not the Russian Academy of Sciences, not the geologists, not the satellites, can fully explain. Today, 8 secrets of Siberia, the most disturbing at the end.
Siberia is not a place. It is a scale. 15 times the size of France, twice the size of the contiguous United States, most of it permanently frozen. The vast majority of it has never been walked by a human being, and a non-trivial portion of it has never been clearly photographed from above.
Beneath the frozen surface, peat, mammoth bones, tundra, taiga, there are things that the Soviet Union spent 70 years quietly studying and quietly classifying. A network of expeditions, geological surveys, military observations. Some of those reports were declassified after 1991. Some, to this day, were not. When you read what was declassified, a pattern emerges. It is the same pattern in 1908, in 1959, in 1986, and in 2014. Something happens. The local population reports it first. The official explanation arrives second, and is reasonable. Then the official explanation begins to crack, slowly around the edges. And behind the cracks, something else stares back. 8 stories, each one anchored to a real point you can find on a map. Each one with a witness, a number, a date. And each one with a question that decades later still has no clean answer. We begin. 1. Irkutsk region, eastern Siberia. The headwaters of the Patom River. A perfect cone of pale, crushed limestone rises out of dense taiga forest. 160 meters across at the base, 40 meters tall. From the air, it looks man-made. From the ground, it looks wrong. The Evenki, the indigenous people of this region, have a name for it that goes back at least 3 centuries. The nest of the fiery eagle. They refused to take their reindeer near it. They told their children that the place steals years from a man's life. Soviet geologist Vadim Kolpakov found it in 1949 while surveying the river. His assessment, after weeks of measurement, a young geological structure, possibly the result of underground gas pressure releasing in a single explosive event. Reasonable. Similar formations exist in other parts of the world. But Kolpakov died before completing his most ambitious return survey, and the crater began behaving strangely. Tree ring analysis of larches growing on its slope showed accelerated growth in certain rings, as if something underneath, periodically, was warming the soil. Magnetic compasses gave conflicting readings near the rim. In 2005, the leader of a Russian Academy expedition, geologist Yevgeny Vorobyev, suffered a fatal heart attack in his helicopter as it approached the crater for the first time. He was 63. He never set foot on it. The expedition continued without him. What is buried under 100 meters of crushed limestone in the Siberian taiga? Officially, a delayed gas eruption from the late 19th century. Off the record, nobody is in a hurry to dig. And nobody has dug since. 200 kilometers south of the Patamsky crater, in the Altai Mountains, there is a cave called Denisova, a long, low-ceilinged limestone chamber on the bank of the Anui River. Bears used it. Wolves used it. Humans used it for at least 300,000 years. In 2008, Russian archaeologists working in a quiet layer of the cave floor recovered a single object, a fragment of a human finger bone the size of a grain of rice. It went into a small plastic bag, was sent to a genetics laboratory in Leipzig, and triggered the most quietly explosive discovery in the history of human paleontology.
The bone did not belong to a Neanderthal. It did not belong to Homo sapiens. The DNA inside it was something else, a previously unknown branch of the human family tree. Cousins of ours who had lived in that cave side by side with us and with Neanderthals for tens of thousands of years. We named them, for lack of a better name, Denisovans. We have to date 4 bone fragments in total: a finger, 2 teeth, a piece of a skull. From 4 pieces of bone, we have reconstructed an entire human species. But the deeper layers of the cave have not been excavated. The DNA evidence shows that Denisovans interbred with Homo sapiens, and that traces of their genome live today in the bodies of modern Tibetans, Melanesians, and Negrito populations of the Philippines. Roughly 5% of some modern human DNA comes from a species we did not know existed 20 years ago. What else has lived in that cave? What else is in the layers we have not opened? Nobody can say. June 30th, 1908, 6 in the morning. Above the stony Tunguska River in central Siberia, the sky splits. Witnesses 200 kilometers away report a column of fire taller than the heavens. Trees flatten over an area of 2,000 square kilometers, larger than the city of Moscow. The ground shakes hard enough to register on seismographs in London. For 3 nights afterward, the European sky glows so brightly that newspapers from Berlin to Stockholm report being able to read a book outdoors at midnight. And there is no crater. None. The first scientific expedition to reach the site, led by Soviet mineralogist Leonid Kulik, did not arrive until 1927, 19 years later. He found the flattened forest radiating outward in a butterfly pattern, every tree pointing away from a single epicenter. At the epicenter itself, the trees were still standing, burnt, stripped of branches, but vertical. Kulik searched for a crater for the rest of his life. He never found one. The official explanation, refined over a century, an airburst meteorite or comet fragment exploded approximately 5 to 10 kilometers above the ground, releasing energy estimated at 15 megatons, 1,000 times the Hiroshima bomb. This is the consensus. But to this day, no fragments of an asteroid or comet have ever been recovered from the site. No iridium signature in the soil consistent with a typical impact. The vegetation in the central zone shows mutations that are unusual, but not scientifically conclusive of anything in particular. Something arrived in central Siberia in 1908 with the energy of 1,000 atomic bombs. We do not know what it was. We have its footprint, and nothing else. Lake Baikal, the deepest lake on Earth. 1,642 meters from surface to bottom. Older than any lake on the planet, 25 million years. It contains roughly 20% of all unfrozen freshwater on the surface of the planet, in a single body of water in southern Siberia. It is also one of the most heavily monitored bodies of water in the world by the Russian military. Has been since the 1950s. In 1982, military divers conducting training exercises in the southern basin reported encountering, at depths of 50 meters, humanoid figures. They described them as approximately 3 meters tall, in tight silver suits, moving without breathing apparatus. According to the reports later partially declassified, 3 of the 7 divers who participated died of decompression sickness, at depths and durations where standard procedure should have made decompression routine. The report was classified for decades,
It was partially declassified in 2009 by the Russian Federation as part of a batch of FSB material on unexplained phenomena in inland water bodies. The report does not draw conclusions. It only records what the divers said and what happened to them afterward. Local fishermen on the lake have spoken for generations of glowing objects rising from the surface at night and disappearing into low cloud. Scientific explanations exist: bioluminescent algae, atmospheric refraction, methane discharge. Each is plausible for a fraction of the sightings. None covers all of them. In 2009, 2 deep-sea Russian submersibles reached the bottom of Baikal. Their findings were never fully published. The excerpts that did appear referenced unexpected biological signatures and thermal anomalies of unknown origin. 25 million years is a long time for something to evolve in a closed system. Long enough to build something the surface has not seen. Northern Urals, January 1959. 9 experienced mountaineering students from Ural Polytechnic Institute set out for a peak called Otorten. They never reach it. On the night of February 1st, on the slope of a mountain that the indigenous Mansi people call Don't Go There, all 9 die. Their tent is found 3 weeks later. It has been cut open from the inside. Their bodies are found scattered across 1.5 kilometers of slope in temperatures of -30°C, several wearing only underwear and socks. 2 have skull fractures consistent with massive blunt force. One, Lyudmila Dubinina, is missing her tongue and her eyes. Another shows traces of radioactive contamination on her clothing. The case is classified by the Soviet authorities until 1990. The official cause of death, when finally released, reads in the autopsy, "a compelling natural force." Nobody has ever explained what that phrase was supposed to mean. In 2020, the Russian Federation reopened the investigation and announced an official conclusion: a slab avalanche combined with disorientation in extreme cold. This is the cleanest explanation available. It accounts for the cut tent, it accounts for the partial dress, it accounts for cold injuries. It does not account for the radioactive contamination. It does not account for Dubinina's missing tongue and eyes. It does not account for why 3 of the 9 have internal injuries described by the medical examiner as comparable to being struck by a moving automobile without external bruising. The Mansi name for the mountain, Don't Go There, predates the incident by an estimated 400 years. They have never explained what it means either. Southern Urals, the steppes of Chelyabinsk Oblast, June 1987. A team of Soviet archaeologists surveying the path of a planned reservoir that would flood the entire valley photographed the ground from a low-flying plane. What they see in the photographs cancels the reservoir project permanently. A perfect double ring cut into the earth, 200 meters across. 2 concentric circles of dwellings, 60 in total, oriented to the cardinal directions with a precision of less than 1 degree. At the center, a square plaza, aligned to specific points of sunrise and sunset on the equinoxes and solstices. Older by approximately 500 years than the better-known Stonehenge in southern England. Arkaim, as it came to be known, is approximately 4,000 years old. It was occupied for somewhere between 200 and 300 years. Then, its inhabitants did something unusual. They burned it down. Carefully, methodically. They removed everything of value, set fire to the remaining structures, and walked away. Nobody returned. There are no skeletons, no abandoned belongings, no trace of conflict. The site is one of more than 20 similar settlements found across the southern Urals, what archaeologists now call the country of towns. All built within roughly the same period. All abandoned and burned in roughly the same way. The DNA of the people who built Arkaim shows them to be among the ancestors of the populations that would later become the Indo-Iranian peoples, the same lineage that produced Vedic India and ancient Persia. Why did they build 20 perfectly planned cities in the Russian steppe 4,000 years ago? And why did they all leave? Certain zones of the site remain restricted to outside researchers. No reason has been published.
Sakha Republic, northeastern Siberia, the basin of the Kolyma River, the world's coldest permanently inhabited region, winter temperatures of -70 Celsius. The permafrost beneath the surface goes down hundreds of meters and has, until very recently, never thawed. Over the last 15 years, as average temperatures rise, the permafrost has begun to release its contents. What has come out of it is, to use the language of the Russian Academy of Sciences, biologically anomalous.
Whole mammoths, 30,000 years old, with intact organs, intact stomach contents, intact skin and hair. Wolves with brains preserved well enough to extract neural tissue. A horse foal, 42,000 years old, from which scientists in 2019 successfully extracted liquid blood, flowing, red, biologically active blood, older than human civilization. In 2014, in collaboration with Russian researchers, a French team led by Jean-Michel Claverie thawed a giant virus called Pithovirus sibericum from Siberian permafrost, dated to 30,000 years old. It was not dormant. It was not damaged. They placed it in a culture of amoebas. Within hours, it was actively infecting them, reproducing, spreading. It only infects amoebas. The next one might not. Soviet biologist Sergei Zimov has spent decades studying the same thawing layers. He has, on record, isolated bacterial strains from permafrost dated to 500,000 years old that resumed metabolic activity within hours of being warmed. A microorganism older than the species Homo sapiens, alive, dividing in a Russian laboratory. How many other viruses are in the layers of ground that are now, every summer, melting? Nobody is testing them all. There's not enough time. And finally, the eighth. Yamal Peninsula, northwestern Siberia. The name Yamal in the Nenets language means the end of the earth. Until 2014, the peninsula was known mostly for natural gas. Then, in July of that year, a helicopter pilot flying over the tundra reported a hole in the ground. Not a small hole, 80 meters wide, bottomless from the air, vertical walls of frozen mud. The earth surrounding it scattered for hundreds of meters in every direction, chunks of frozen turf the size of cars, thrown outward in a radial pattern. It was as if the ground had exploded. A Russian Academy of Sciences team reached the site within weeks. Their preliminary explanation? A buildup of methane gas trapped under the permafrost cap, releasing in a single eruptive event as the surface above thawed. Plausible. Methane pockets in Siberian permafrost are well documented. But since 2014, more than 20 similar craters have appeared, each one a violent, unannounced eruption, each one releasing an unknown quantity of methane into the atmosphere. The largest exceeds 100 meters across. The smallest are appearing closer and closer to populated areas, to gas pipelines, to indigenous Nenets settlements, to roads. In 2020, a herder reported witnessing one form. He described a column of flame that rose, he said, higher than the trees. Nobody knows how many craters are forming each year. Most of Yamal is uninhabited. Most eruptions go unwitnessed and undocumented. Satellite surveys catch only the largest. The Russian Ministry of Natural Resources has not published a comprehensive count since 2018. Stop on this fact. The largest land mass on Earth is in slow motion, exploding from beneath. The methane released by these craters is ton for ton, roughly 30 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Each major eruption releases an estimated 1 to 5,000 tons. 20 confirmed craters, likely many more unconfirmed. The math is not difficult, and it is not optimistic. This is not a future event. This is happening as you watch this video. Somewhere in northern Siberia, in the last week, the ground has erupted in a hole the size of a city block. Nobody saw it. The data simply does not exist yet.
Stop for a moment. Look at what we have just walked through. A crater that punishes the scientists who study it. A cave whose lowest layers contain a human species we cannot fully name. A forest flattened by something that left no fragments. A lake 1.5 kilometers deep with classified divers' reports from the bottom. A pass in the Urals where 9 people died from a compelling natural force. 20 perfectly planned cities, 4,000 years old, abandoned in unison and burned in silence. A landscape that thaws to release living 500,000-year-old bacteria. And a peninsula whose ground is, right now, opening into holes the size of city blocks. What unites these stories? It is not the strangeness. Strange things happen everywhere on the planet. It is the silence. In every one of these 8 cases, an official version exists. It is reasonable, it is published. And in every one, when you read it carefully, there is a sentence missing, a measurement that was never taken, a report that was never released, an expedition that was never funded, a question that was never asked out loud. Siberia is not a mysterious place because it hides things. Siberia is mysterious because it is so large, so cold, and so empty that it absorbs the questions before anyone can finish asking them. The Soviet Union studied this land for 70 years and classified what it found. The Russian Federation has, by and large, continued the practice. The rest of the world either cannot get permission or cannot afford the helicopter fuel, or cannot survive the winter long enough to ask. So, Siberia keeps its 8 secrets, and almost certainly several thousand more. Write in the comments which of the 8 cut deepest for you, 1 through 8. The pattern of which stories hit hardest tells us where to dig next. If something in this video shifted the way you look at the map of the planet, even by a few degrees, leave a like. It is a small gesture, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of work deserves to keep being made. And subscribe if you have not. The next ascent is already being researched. There are places on this planet where the questions multiply faster than anyone can count them. We have not yet run out of them.